I was holding the divorce papers in my hand when I heard my wife say the words I thought I would never hear. I remember standing in the hallway of my own home, unable to move, because the conversation coming from the kitchen was not what I expected. For months, I had convinced myself that my marriage was already over. I believed Laura had stopped loving me. I believed she had become distant because she no longer wanted the life we built together. But that night, before I could walk away forever, I heard something that made me question everything I thought I knew. My name is Daniel Carter, and after 28 years of marriage, I thought I understood my wife. I thought I knew when things changed. I thought I knew why we had become strangers living under the same roof. But standing there in the quiet hallway, listening to Laura talk to her mother, I realized I might have been wrong about the person I had spent nearly 3 decades loving. The divorce papers were inside my briefcase on the desk in my home office. I had spent weeks thinking about that decision. It was not something I wanted to do. It was something I convinced myself I needed to do. Laura and I were not the kind of couple who constantly fought. There were no dramatic moments that made everyone around us notice something was wrong. Our marriage faded slowly, almost silently. We became two people who knew each other's routines, but forgot how to share our feelings. We still ate dinner together. We still asked polite questions about each other's day. But somewhere along the way, those conversations became automatic. The warmth disappeared. The connection became harder to find. I started feeling like I was the only one trying. I told myself that Laura had changed. I thought maybe she no longer saw me as the man she married. I thought maybe after all these years, she had simply grown tired of me. So I made a decision. I would end the marriage before we spent more years pretending everything was fine. That evening, I came home earlier than expected because I needed to pick up some documents. I was not planning to have a serious conversation with Laura. I was not planning to reopen old wounds. I just wanted to finish what I had already started. But when I opened the front door, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Laura was speaking with her mother, Margaret. At first, I was going to walk past and give them privacy. I knew they were having a personal conversation. But then I heard my own name. Daniel thinks I do not care about him anymore, Laura said softly. I stopped. My hand was still resting on the hallway wall. I did not know why, but something inside me told me to listen. I think he believes I gave up on us, Laura continued. But that is not true. I just do not know how to reach him anymore. Those words stayed with me. I had spent months believing Laura was the one who had emotionally walked away. But now I was hearing something completely different. Margaret asked her daughter why she had not told me how she felt. Laura was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that changed the way I saw everything. Because I am afraid he already feels like he failed. I do not want him to think I am adding another burden to his life. I looked down at the divorce papers inside my briefcase. Failed. That was the word I could not forget. I had always thought Laura was disappointed in me. I thought she saw my silence as a lack of care. I thought she no longer appreciated everything I did for our family. But maybe I had been looking at the wrong problem. Maybe we were both hurting in ways we never admitted. I quietly stepped away from the kitchen and went into my office. I sat at my desk and stared at the papers I had spent so much time preparing. For the first time, they did not feel like the answer. They felt like a decision I was about to make without knowing the entire truth. That night, I did not sign anything. I did not call the attorney. I simply sat there wondering how two people who had spent 28 years together could end up feeling so far apart. And for the first time in months, I was not asking myself why my wife stopped loving me. I was asking a much harder question. What if she never stopped? What if I was the one who stopped listening? After that night, I could not look at my marriage the same way again. The conversation I overheard was only a few minutes long, but it changed the way I saw the last several years of my life. I had spent so much time believing I knew the reason Laura and I had grown apart. I thought she had become distant because she no longer cared. I thought the silence between us was proof that our relationship was ending. But now I had a different question. What if the silence was not because we stopped loving each other? What if it was because we both stopped knowing how to reach each other? The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I sat alone at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, looking around the room that had been part of our lives for decades. That table had seen birthday celebrations, holiday dinners, and countless ordinary mornings before work. It held memories of a time when Laura and I could talk about anything. We did not need a reason to sit together. We simply wanted to be around each other. Somehow, without noticing, we had moved from wanting to share our lives to simply managing them. When Laura walked into the kitchen, she smiled and said good morning. It was such a normal moment, but I noticed something I had ignored for a long time. She still smiled at me the same way. She still cared about the small things. She still asked if I slept well. I had been so focused on what I thought was missing that I had stopped seeing what was still there. "Are you okay?" Laura asked. I almost told her everything. I almost told her that I heard the conversation. I almost told her about the divorce papers. But something stopped me. I realized I needed time to understand my own feelings before bringing them to her. I did not want to accuse her. I did not want to create another conversation where we both felt misunderstood. Instead, I decided to pay attention. Over the next few days, I started noticing small things I had forgotten. Laura still prepared dinner with the foods she knew I liked. She still reminded me about appointments when she knew I had a busy week. She still asked about my work, even when my answers were short. Those things had always been there. I had just stopped recognizing them. That realization was uncomfortable because it meant I had to admit something about myself. Maybe I was not the only one trying to keep the marriage together. Maybe Laura had been trying in ways I did not notice. That weekend, I decided to visit Margaret. I needed to talk to someone who knew Laura well, but was also willing to be honest with me. When I arrived at her home, she welcomed me inside and immediately noticed something was different. "Daniel, you look like you have something on your mind," she said. I sat down at her kitchen table and took a deep breath. I did not tell her that I had overheard Laura's conversation. Instead, I simply said, "I think Laura and I have been struggling for a long time, and I do not think I understood why." Margaret looked at me quietly for a moment. Then she said something I did not expect. "Daniel, Laura has never stopped loving you." I looked down because those words were difficult to hear. "Then why did it feel like she did?" I asked. Margaret sighed gently. "Because love is not always about what someone feels inside. Sometimes it is about what they are able to show." She explained that Laura had been worried about me for months. She said Laura noticed how much pressure I carried at work and how often I came home exhausted. She believed I was struggling, but did not know how to help without making me feel like I was failing. She was afraid that if she told you she felt lonely, you would think she was blaming you, Margaret said. I sat there quietly because I realized something important. I had spent months thinking Laura did not understand me. But maybe she understood more than I knew. Maybe she saw my struggles and simply did not know how to get close enough to help. On the drive home, I kept thinking about everything Margaret said. For years, I believed my marriage was falling apart because my wife had changed. But now I wondered if we had both changed and simply never stopped to tell each other how we felt. When I arrived home, I looked at the office door where the divorce papers were still waiting inside. I did not open the drawer. I did not need to. For the first time since I started considering divorce, I was not thinking about how to leave. I was thinking about whether I had given us a real chance to stay. For the first time in years, I started looking at my marriage from a different perspective. I stopped asking why Laura had changed and started asking when we had both stopped being the people we used to be with each other. That question was harder because it meant looking at my own choices, not just hers. It meant admitting that maybe I had spent too much time searching for the moment my wife became distant and not enough time thinking about the moments when I became distant too. A few days after my conversation with Margaret, I found an old box in the closet while looking for some paperwork. Inside were photographs from the early years of my marriage. I almost put the box away, but something made me sit down and look through it. I saw pictures of Laura and me when we were younger. There was one from our first house. The paint was not perfect, the furniture was simple, and we did not have much money. But we looked happy. We looked like two people who were excited to build a life together. Another picture showed us during a family vacation. Laura was laughing, and I remembered how she used to find happiness in the smallest moments. Looking at those pictures, I realized something painful. I had been keeping track of everything I thought we had lost, but I had forgotten how much we had built. I had been measuring my marriage by the difficult years instead of the beautiful ones that came before them. That evening, I decided I needed to talk to Laura. Not because I wanted answers to prove I was right. Not because I wanted to explain why I felt hurt. I wanted to listen. When we sat together in the living room, I turned off the television. It was a small thing, but it felt important. For years, we had filled quiet moments with distractions because silence between us felt uncomfortable. This time, I wanted to be present. "Laura," I said, "when did we stop feeling like a team?" She looked surprised by the question. For a few seconds, she did not say anything. Then she looked down and took a deep breath. "I do not know exactly," she said, "but I think it happened slowly. She told me that she never woke up one day and decided she felt differently about me. There was no single moment when everything changed. Instead, there were small moments that added up. Times when she wanted to share something but decided not to. Times when she wanted to talk but thought I was too tired. Times when she felt alone but convinced herself it was easier to stay quiet. Hearing that was difficult because those moments sounded familiar. I remembered times when Laura tried to start conversations and I responded with short answers because I was thinking about work. I remembered evenings when she wanted to talk about our future and I was focused on the next problem I needed to solve. I never intended to make her feel unimportant. But I finally understood that good intentions do not always prevent someone from feeling hurt. I thought you were unhappy with me, I admitted. Laura looked at me with sadness. I thought you were unhappy with me too. That was the moment we both realized something. We had spent years assuming we knew what the other person felt without actually asking. We were both afraid of rejection. We were both protecting ourselves. And in doing that, we created the exact distance we were afraid of. Over the next few weeks, Laura and I started making small changes. We did not make promises that everything would suddenly become perfect. We knew real life did not work that way. Instead, we focused on being more intentional with each other. We started taking walks after dinner. We sat together in the morning with coffee before beginning our days. We asked questions and waited for honest answers. Those moments seemed simple, but they reminded us of who we were before we became overwhelmed by responsibilities. One afternoon, Laura and I visited a local park where we had taken our children when they were young. We walked along the same paths and remembered old stories. She smiled and said, "I forgot how much I missed this." I knew exactly what she meant. We were not just missing activities. We were missing the feeling of being connected. That night, I went back to my office and looked at the divorce papers again. They were still there, waiting in the same drawer. But they no longer felt like the future. They felt like a reminder of how close I had come to making a decision without understanding the full story. Still, I knew there was more we needed to discuss. I had discovered why Laura felt distant, but there was one question that remained in my mind. Why had she felt safer telling her mother everything instead of telling me? The answer to that question would reveal the part of our marriage we had ignored for far too long. For the first time in a long time, I stopped thinking about what I believed had happened and started trying to understand what actually happened. The question that stayed with me was simple but painful. Why had Laura felt safer talking to her mother than talking to me? I did not want the answer because I was angry. I wanted the answer because I needed to understand how my wife could feel so alone while I was standing right beside her. A few days after our conversation in the living room, I decided to ask her directly. I knew it was not going to be easy. Some questions are difficult because they might reveal something we are not ready to hear. But after everything we had shared, I knew avoiding the conversation would only bring us back to the same place. That evening, Laura and I sat on the back porch of our home. It was the same porch where we had spent countless summer evenings over the years. We had watched our children grow up from that porch. We had celebrated birthdays there. We had talked about our hopes and plans there. But recently, we had mostly sat there in silence. "Laura," I said, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to know I am not asking because I am upset." She looked at me and nodded. "Why did you feel like you could tell your mother things you could not tell me?" For a moment, she looked away. I could see she was trying to find the right words. "Because I was afraid you would think I was criticizing you," she finally said. Her answer surprised me. I had always thought Laura avoided difficult conversations because she did not care enough to have them. But she explained that it was the opposite. She cared so much that she was afraid of making things worse. She told me that she saw how much pressure I carried. She saw how hard I worked. She saw how often I worried about providing for our family and keeping everything together. "I knew you were tired, Daniel," she said. "And I did not want you to feel like you were failing because I was unhappy." Those words stayed with me because I realized something important. Laura had been protecting me from a problem I did not even know existed. But in trying to protect me, she had hidden her own feelings. And in my attempt to handle everything myself, I had created a situation where she felt she had nowhere to turn. We were both trying to love each other, but we were doing it in ways that created more distance. Laura continued talking about the years when she started feeling disconnected from me. She said there were moments when she wanted to tell me about her day, but I seemed distracted. There were moments when she wanted to share her worries, but she decided to wait because I looked exhausted. She said eventually she convinced herself that maybe her feelings were not important enough to bring up. Hearing that was one of the hardest things I had ever experienced. Not because Laura was blaming me. She was not. In fact, she was careful not to make me feel guilty. That made it harder because I knew she was simply telling me the truth. I never wanted you to feel alone, I said. Laura looked at me and smiled softly. I know. That was the hardest part. I knew you loved me. I just missed feeling connected to you. That sentence explained everything. Our problem was never a lack of love. It was a lack of communication. We had spent years assuming love was enough without realizing that love also needed attention. After that conversation, we started making a new effort to be more open with each other. We talked about things we had avoided for years. We discussed our fears, our regrets, and even the moments when we had disappointed each other. It was not always comfortable, but it felt honest. One evening, Laura asked me a question that I had not expected. Do you still want to leave? I looked at her for a long moment. Months earlier, I would have answered without hesitation. But now, after hearing her heart and understanding my own mistakes, I realized I was no longer the same person who had prepared those divorce papers. No, I said. I want to understand how we got here, and I want to see if we can find our way back. Laura reached across the table and held my hand. It was a small moment, but it meant everything. Still, I knew rebuilding our marriage would require more than understanding the past. We had to decide what kind of future we wanted to create. Because sometimes discovering the truth is only the beginning. The real challenge is deciding what you will do with it. After the conversation with Laura on the back porch, I realized something important. Understanding the truth about our marriage was only the first step. The harder part was accepting that rebuilding our relationship required both of us to change the way we had been living for years. It was not enough to say we loved each other. We had to learn how to show that love in ways the other person could actually feel. For a long time, I believed that love was proven through responsibility. I thought working hard, paying bills, and making sure our family had what they needed was the clearest way to show my commitment. And those things mattered. But Laura helped me understand that a marriage cannot survive on responsibility alone. A person can feel supported and still feel lonely. A person can have everything they need and still miss feeling seen. That was something I had never considered before. A few weeks later, Laura and I decided to spend a weekend away from home. It was not a luxury vacation or anything expensive. We rented a small cabin a few hours away from our town in Ohio. We wanted a quiet place where we could focus on each other without the distractions of everyday life. During the drive, we talked more than we had in years. We talked about memories from when we were younger. We laughed about mistakes we made as newlyweds. We remembered the dreams we had before careers, responsibilities, and daily routines took over. At one point, Laura looked out the window and said, I miss the people we used to be. I understood exactly what she meant, but I also realized something. We did not need to become those younger versions of ourselves again. We needed to appreciate who we had become while making space for the parts of ourselves we had forgotten. That weekend gave us time to talk about things we had avoided. Laura admitted that she sometimes felt like she was competing with my work for my attention. I admitted that I often used work as a place to hide because I felt more confident solving problems there than dealing with emotions I did not understand. Saying that out loud was difficult. I had always seen myself as someone who handled challenges well. But emotional challenges required a different kind of strength. They required honesty. When we returned home, we started making small changes. We began having dinner together without checking our phones. We started taking evening walks around our neighborhood again. We made time every week to ask each other questions that went beyond daily responsibilities. Simple questions like, how are you really feeling? And, is there something you have been afraid to tell me? At first, those conversations felt unusual. After years of avoiding deeper discussions, opening up again required patience. But slowly, it became easier. One evening, Laura and I were looking through old family photos when she found a picture from our first anniversary. We were standing outside a small restaurant where we had celebrated. We looked happy and hopeful. Laura smiled and said, I remember that night. We talked for hours. I smiled too. We talked about everything. Then she looked at me and said something I would never forget. I think we stopped asking questions because we thought we already knew all the answers. That sentence stayed with me because it described exactly what had happened. We had known each other for almost 3 decades, but we had forgotten that people continue to grow and change. Knowing someone for a long time does not mean you stop discovering them. It means you have more reasons to keep discovering them. As the weeks passed, I noticed changes. In both of us, Laura seemed lighter. I felt more connected. We were not pretending the difficult years never happened. We were learning from them. But there was still one thing I needed to address. The divorce papers were still in my office drawer. I had not signed them. I had not thrown them away. They represented the moment when I almost gave up. One evening, I took them out and looked at them again. I realized they were not just papers. They were a reminder of how close I came to making a permanent decision during a temporary season of pain. But before I could truly let them go, I knew I needed to have one more conversation with Laura, because there was still a question I had not asked. A question about the moment when she decided to tell her mother instead of telling me. And the answer would show me just how much we both had been carrying alone. The more Laura and I talked, the more I realized that the hardest part of rebuilding our marriage was not forgiving each other. It was understanding how we had reached a place where we both felt alone while still loving each other. That was the part one kept thinking about. How could two people who had spent 28 years together become strangers without either person noticing the distance growing between them? I needed to understand the moment when Laura decided that talking to her mother felt easier than talking to me. Not because I wanted to blame her. I wanted to understand what I had missed. One evening, after dinner, Laura and I sat at the kitchen table. The house was quiet. The same kitchen where I had once overheard the conversation that changed everything. I looked at her and said, "There is something I still need to ask you." Laura knew exactly what I meant. She put down her coffee cup and waited. "Why did you feel like you could tell your mother things you could not tell me?" For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Laura took a deep breath. "Because I was afraid you would hear my feelings as criticism," she said. Her answer surprised me because it was not what I expected. I thought she would say she felt closer to her mother. I thought she would say she trusted her mother more than me, but that was not it. Laura explained that she never wanted someone else to replace me. She wanted me. She wanted our marriage. She wanted the person she married to understand what was happening inside her. But she felt like every time she tried to start a serious conversation, I was already carrying so much that she did not want to add more weight to my shoulders. "I knew you were trying, Daniel," she said. "That was what made it so hard. I knew you loved me. I just did not know how to tell you that I felt alone without making you feel like everything you had done was not enough." Those words affected me deeply because they revealed something I had never considered. I had spent years believing Laura did not appreciate me. But maybe she appreciated me more than I knew. Maybe that was why she was so careful with her words. She was not trying to hurt me. She was trying to protect me. The problem was that both of us were protecting each other in ways that created more distance. I thought being strong meant handling everything myself. Laura thought being loving meant keeping her worries to herself. Neither of us realized that a marriage requires two people who are willing to be honest, even when honesty feels uncomfortable. Laura continued explaining that there were many moments when she wanted to reach out. She remembered evenings when we sat together after dinner, but barely spoke. She remembered weekends when she wanted to make plans, but felt like I needed rest more than I needed conversation. She remembered times when she almost told me she was unhappy, but then convinced herself that maybe things were not bad enough to discuss. Listening to her, I felt a mixture of sadness and regret. Not because I believed I had failed completely. I knew I had always tried to be a good husband. But I realized trying is not always the same as connecting. Sometimes we can give someone everything we think they need and still miss the one thing they're quietly asking for. To be seen, to be heard, to feel important. After that conversation, I told Laura something I had never said before. I think I spent a long time trying to prove I was a good husband, but I forgot to ask if you actually felt loved by me. Laura reached across the table and held my hand. And I think I spent a long time hoping you would notice what I needed without telling you clearly. We both smiled because we finally understood something. We had been waiting for each other to make the first move. We had both wanted reassurance, but neither of us wanted to risk feeling rejected. That night became another turning point for us. We were no longer just discussing the problems in our marriage. We were discussing the reasons behind them. We started talking about the future, not just the past. We talked about the things we wanted to experience together and the memories we still wanted to create. But there was one final thing I needed to do. I needed to make a decision about the divorce papers that had been sitting in my office. They represented the moment when I thought walking away was the only option. Now I had to decide what they would represent going forward. An ending, or a reminder of the moment we chose to find our way back to each other. The divorce papers stayed in my office drawer for another week. Every time I walked past that room, I remembered the person I was when I first placed them there. I remembered the frustration, the loneliness, and the belief that ending my marriage was the only way to find peace. But now, when I looked at those papers, I saw something different. I saw a reminder of how easily two people can misunderstand each other when they stop communicating. I saw the moment when I almost walked away from a woman who had been standing beside me for nearly 3 decades. I knew I could not keep those papers hidden forever. They represented a choice I had almost made without knowing the full truth. So one Saturday morning, I walked into my office, opened the drawer, and picked them up. I sat at my desk for a long time, looking at the documents that once felt like my escape. But instead of feeling relief, I felt sadness. Not because I regretted everything, because I realized how close I came to losing something valuable without giving it the attention it deserved. Later that day, I asked Laura to sit with me in the living room. I placed the papers on the coffee table between us. She looked at them quietly. I could see the emotions on her face, but she did not say anything. "I want you to know something," I said. "These papers were real. I really believed ending our marriage was the answer." Laura looked down. "I know," she said softly. Her response surprised me. "You knew?" I asked. She nodded. "I could feel you pulling away. I just did not know how far you had already gone in your mind." Hearing that was difficult. Not because she was trying to hurt me. She was simply being honest. I realized that while I was secretly preparing for a divorce, Laura had already been experiencing the emotional distance between us. We were both living with fear. I was afraid that she no longer wanted me. She was afraid that I had already stopped choosing her. We were both waiting for proof that the other person cared, while forgetting that we had the ability to show that care ourselves. "I am sorry," I told her. Not because I had difficult feelings. I think we both had difficult feelings. I am sorry because I made such a big decision without giving us one more chance to really talk. Laura reached for my hand. "I am sorry too," she said. "I should have told you what was happening inside me instead of hoping you would somehow know." That moment was important because neither of us was trying to win. We were not keeping score of who hurt more. We were simply two people admitting that we had both made mistakes. Over the next several months, we continued rebuilding our relationship. We did not pretend that everything suddenly became easy. There were still moments when old habits returned. There were still times when one of us needed to stop and remember what we had learned. But the difference was that we no longer avoided those moments. We talked about them. We started creating new traditions together. Every Friday evening, we went for a walk around our neighborhood. Sometimes we talked about serious things. Sometimes we talked about nothing important at all. But we were together. We started planning small trips again. We visited places around Ohio that we had ignored for years because we were always too busy. We learned that reconnecting did not require huge changes. It required consistent effort. One evening, Laura and I visited Margaret for dinner. She noticed almost immediately that something had changed between us. After we finished eating, she smiled and said, "You two seem different." Laura looked at me and smiled. "We are trying to listen more." Margaret nodded. "That has always been the secret. People think love disappears because of one big moment. Most of the time, it disappears because people stop paying attention to the small moments." That sentence stayed with me because it explained so much about our journey. Our marriage was not broken because we stopped loving each other. It was struggling because we stopped noticing each other. We stopped asking questions. We stopped sharing the small thoughts that connected us. We stopped making each other feel chosen. But now we were learning again. Looking back, I do not think the divorce papers were the worst thing that happened to us. In a strange way, they became the wake-up call we needed. They forced me to ask questions I had avoided. They forced me to listen when I had spent years assuming I already knew the answers. And they showed me something I will never forget. Sometimes the person you think you are losing is the same person who has been waiting for you to come closer. But there was still one thing I needed to do before I could truly move forward. I needed to let go of the version of our marriage that no longer existed and accept the possibility of creating something new. For a long time, I believed that saving a marriage meant going back to the way things were before the problem started. I thought if Laura and I could somehow return to the early years, when everything felt simple and natural, then we would be okay. But I eventually learned something important. We were not meant to go backward. We were meant to move forward and create something stronger from everything we had learned. The old version of our marriage was built on love, but it was also built on assumptions. We assumed we knew what the other person needed. We assumed silence meant everything was fine. We assumed love would always be enough, without constant effort. Now we understood that a strong relationship requires attention every single day. One evening, Laura and I sat in our backyard watching the sunset. It was a peaceful moment, the kind of moment I used to overlook because I was always thinking about the next responsibility. I looked at my wife and realized how much I had missed by being distracted. "I want to ask you something," I said. Laura smiled. "What is it?" "When you talked to your mother that night, did you really think our marriage could be saved?" She looked at me for a moment before answering. "Yes," she said. "I did." Her answer surprised me. "Even then?" I asked. She nodded. "Especially then." Laura explained that the conversation with her mother was never about planning a life without me. It was about trying to understand how to reach me. She said she felt like she was losing the person she loved, but she did not want to give up. She wanted advice from someone who knew both of us. She wanted someone to help her find the right words. "I was not talking to my mother because I wanted to leave," she said. "I was talking to her because I wanted to find a way back to you." Hearing that changed the last piece of my understanding. I had spent so much time thinking that conversation was evidence that my wife was already moving away from me. But the truth was the opposite. It was evidence that she was still trying to hold on. That realization stayed with me because it showed me how dangerous assumptions can be. We create entire stories in our minds based on incomplete information. We decide what someone feels without ever asking them. We prepare ourselves for an ending before giving the other person a chance to explain. I had done exactly that. I had looked at Laura's silence and assumed she did not care. I had looked at our distance and assumed the love was gone. But I never stopped to ask what was happening beneath the surface. A few weeks later, I finally made a decision about the divorce papers. I did not keep them as a reminder of a difficult time anymore. I let them go, not because our marriage became perfect. It did not. We still had disagreements. We still had moments when old habits tried to return. But we had something we did not have before. We had the willingness to face those moments together. Laura and I started planning the future again. We talked about places we wanted to visit after retirement. We discussed things we wanted to experience together. We even started making plans for small weekend trips instead of waiting for the perfect opportunity. We learned that a meaningful life is created through small moments repeated over time. One morning, while we were having coffee together, Laura looked at me and said, "You know what I think changed the most?" I smiled and asked, "What?" She answered, "We stopped trying to prove who was right." I thought about that for a moment. She was right. For years, we had both been defending our own feelings. I wanted her to understand why I felt hurt. She wanted me to understand why she felt lonely. But neither of us was truly listening because we were too focused on being understood. Now we were learning something different. We were learning that love is not about winning an argument. It is about protecting the connection between two people. Looking back, I know there was a moment when I almost walked away from the woman who had shared nearly 3 decades of life with me. I almost ended something valuable because I believed I already knew the truth. But I did not know the truth. I only knew my version of it. And sometimes the biggest changes in our lives happen when we are willing to question the stories we have been telling ourselves. Laura and I were not the same couple we were before. We were better in some ways because we finally understood what we had almost lost. But there was still one final lesson I needed to learn. A lesson about the difference between loving someone and making sure they feel loved. Looking back now, I realized the biggest lesson from my marriage was not about the divorce papers, the difficult conversations, or even the moment I overheard Laura speaking with her mother. The biggest lesson was understanding that love is not only about what we feel inside. Love is about what the other person experiences because of us. For years, I believed that because I loved Laura, she automatically knew it. I thought my actions spoke clearly enough. I worked hard. I provided for our family. I stayed committed. I believed those things should have told her everything she needed to know. But I learned that love has many different languages, and sometimes the way we show love is not the way the person beside us needs to receive it. Laura did not need me to prove that I was responsible. She needed me to remind her that she was important. She needed my attention, my curiosity, and my presence. She needed to feel like I was still choosing her, not just continuing a routine we had built together. Months after everything changed, Laura and I were sitting in our backyard again. It had become one of our favorite places to talk. The same place where we had once discussed our problems was now where we planned our future. The evening was quiet, and I remember thinking about how different everything felt. The house was the same. The neighborhood was the same. We were the same two people. But something between us had changed. We had stopped assuming and started asking. We had stopped defending and started listening. Do you ever think about that night? Laura asked. I knew exactly what she meant. I looked at her and smiled. I think about it more than you know. She nodded. So do I. We sat there for a moment before I said something I had carried with me for a long time. I almost walked away because I thought you had already left me emotionally. Laura looked at me quietly. And I almost gave up because I thought you did not want to hear me anymore. That was the truth neither of us had understood back then. We were not fighting against each other. We were both afraid of losing the same thing. We just did not know how to say it. When I think about the person I was before that night, I realize I was not a bad husband. I was a husband who forgot that relationships need more than good intentions. I cared about Laura deeply, but I had become too comfortable believing she already knew that. I forgot that even the strongest relationships need reminders. They need conversations. They need effort. They need two people willing to keep discovering each other. Laura and I are still not a perfect couple. I do not think any couple is. We still have disagreements. We still have days when life becomes stressful. But now we handle those moments differently. We do not let silence grow between us. We do not assume we know what the other person is thinking. We talk. We listen. We make space for each other. A few years ago, I thought the end of my marriage was the answer to my unhappiness. I thought leaving would solve the pain I felt. But what I really needed was not an ending. I needed understanding. I needed honesty. I needed the courage to have a conversation I had been avoiding. The divorce papers I once held in my hands are now only a memory of a difficult chapter in our lives. They remind me of how close I came to losing something I still valued. They remind me that sometimes the person we think is walking away is actually waiting for us to come closer. If there is one thing I would tell someone going through a difficult season in their relationship, it is this. Do not assume you already know the whole story. Do not let silence answer questions that only honest conversations can answer. The person beside you may be carrying feelings they are afraid to share. They may be hoping you notice something they do not know how to explain. Sometimes saving a relationship does not begin with a dramatic moment. Sometimes it begins with one question, one honest answer, and one decision to truly listen. I almost lost my wife because I thought I understood everything. But the truth was, I had stopped paying attention. And when I finally started listening again, I discovered that the love I thought was gone had been there all along, waiting for both of us to find our way back.